Hello and welcome everyone to Oceanside Library's online program. Tonight we have an important discussion on grief with local author Mike Flood. So I'd love to introduce him at this time. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me. Like Ocaria said, I'm Mike Flood. I am the author of Where Are You? Finding Myself in My Greatest Loss. It is a memoir about loss and healing. Where Are You? Finding Myself in My Greatest Loss by M.J. Flood. Our guest and friend Ken Frank has posted the link in the chat. If you are interested, you can check it out there. I have so many things to talk about. Writing this book has been an adventure and a pleasure, and at times it's a struggle. But right now, it is almost bedtime for my kids. So I spoke with Ocaria before we started, and I asked if she wouldn't mind too much, or if she thought it'd be a good idea if I started tonight with story time. So if you've got little kids nearby and they are at all interested, I am going to read the story for my girls, Charlotte and Judith, my daughters. I read to them every night, basically without fail. Charlotte, who is now becoming a reader herself and can read all by herself without me, still listens as we read Little House on the Prairie or any other of the books that we read. So right now they're getting ready for bed, and since I'm going to miss that traditional time, I am going to read to them and to you. And I've chosen this title because it's a classic in this house. We love the story. I personally love William Steig. Sylvester and the Magic Pebble is a great and profound story. So for those adults of you that are with me, this is for you too, but the kids love it. I'm going to start. Sylvester Duncan lived with his mother and father at Acorn Road in Oatesdale. One of his hobbies was collecting pebbles of unusual shape and color. On a rainy Saturday during vacation, he found a quite extraordinary one. It was flaming red, shiny, and perfectly round like a marble. As he was studying this remarkable pebble, he began to shiver, probably from excitement, and the rain felt cold on his back. "I wish it would stop raining," he said. To his great surprise, the rain stopped. It didn't stop gradually as rains usually do. It ceased. The drops vanished on the way down. The clouds disappeared. Everything was dry, and the sun was shining as if rain had never existed. In all his young life, Sylvester had never had a wish gratified so quickly. It struck him that magic must be at work, and he guessed that the magic must be in the remarkable-looking red pebble, where indeed it was. To make a test, he put the pebble on the ground and said, "I wish it would rain again." Nothing happened. But when he said the same thing, holding the pebble in his hoof, the sky turned black, there was lightning and a clap of thunder, and the rain came shooting down. "What a lucky day is this," thought Sylvester. "From now on, I can have anything I want. My father and mother can have anything they want. My relatives, my friends, and anybody at all can have everything anybody wants." He wished the sunshine back in the sky, and he wished a wart on his left hind fetlock would disappear, and it did. And he started home, eager to amaze his father and mother with his magic pebble. He could hardly wait to see their faces. Maybe they wouldn't even believe him at first. As he was crossing Strawberry Hill, thinking of some of the many, many things he could wish for, he was startled to see a mean, hungry lion looking right at him from behind some tall grass. He was frightened. If he hadn't been so frightened, he could have made the lion disappear, or could have wished himself safe at home with his father and mother. He could have wished the lion would turn into a butterfly, or a daisy, or a gnat. He could have wished many things, but he panicked and couldn't think carefully. "I wish I were a rock," he said, and he became a rock. The lion came bounding over, sniffed the rock 100 times, walked around and around it, and went away confused, perplexed, puzzled, and bewildered. I saw that little donkey as clear as day. Maybe I'm going crazy, he muttered. And there was Sylvester, a rock on Strawberry Hill, with the magic pebble lying right beside him on the ground, and he was unable to pick it up. Oh, how I wish I were myself again, he thought, but nothing happened. He had to be touching the pebble to make the magic work, but there was nothing he could do about it. His thoughts began to race like mad. He was scared and worried. Being helpless, he felt hopeless. He imagined all the possibilities, and eventually he realized that his only chance of becoming himself again was for someone to find the red pebble and to wish that the rock next to it would be a donkey. Someone would surely find the red pebble. It was so bright and shiny. But what on earth would make them wish that a rock were a donkey? The chance was 1 in a billion at best. Sylvester fell asleep. What else could he do? Night came with many stars. Meanwhile, back at home, Mr. and Mrs. Duncan paced the floor, frantic with worry. Sylvester had never come home later than dinner time. Where could he be? They stayed up all night wondering what had happened, expecting that Sylvester would surely turn up by morning, but he didn't, of course. Mrs. Duncan cried a lot, and Mr. Duncan did his best to soothe her. Both longed to have their dear son with them. I will never scold Sylvester again as long as I live, said Mrs. Duncan, no matter what he does. At dawn, they went about inquiring of all their neighbors. They talked to all the children, the puppies, the kittens, the colts, the piglets. No one had seen Sylvester since the day before yesterday. They went to the police. The police could not find their child. All the dogs in Oatsdale went searching for him. They sniffed behind every rock and tree and blade of grass, into every nook and gully of the neighborhood and beyond, but found not a scent of him. They sniffed the rock on Strawberry Hill, but it smelled like a rock. It didn't smell like Sylvester. After a month of searching the same places over and over and inquiring of the same animals, Mr. and Mrs. Duncan no longer knew what to do. They concluded that something dreadful must have happened and that they would probably never see their son again, though all the time he was less than a mile away. They tried their best to be happy, to go about their usual ways, but their usual ways included Sylvester, and they were always reminded of him. They were miserable. Life had no meaning for them anymore. Night followed day, and day followed night. Sylvester on the hill woke up less and less often. When he was awake, he was only hopeless and unhappy. He felt he would be a rock forever, and he tried to get used to it. He went into an endless sleep. The days grew colder. Fall came with the leaves changing color, and the leaves fell and the grass bent to the ground. Then it was winter. The winds blew this way and that. It snowed. Mostly the animals stayed indoors, living on the food they had stored up. One day a wolf sat on the rock that was Sylvester and howled because he was hungry. Then the snows melted. The earth warmed up in the spring sun and things budded. Leaves were on the trees again. Flowers showed their young faces. One day in May, Mr. Duncan insisted that his wife go with him on a picnic. Let's cheer up, he said. Let us try to live again and be happy, even though Sylvester, our angel, is no longer with us. They went to Strawberry Hill. Mrs. Duncan sat down on the rock. The warmth of his own mother sitting on him woke Sylvester up from his deep winter sleep. How he wanted to shout, "Mother, Father, it's me, Sylvester, I'm right here." But he couldn't talk. He had no voice. He was stone dumb. Mr. Duncan walked aimlessly about while Mrs. Duncan set out the picnic food on the rock. Alfalfa sandwiches, pickled oats, sassafras salad, Timothy compote, Suddenly, Mr. Duncan saw the red pebble. "What a fantastic pebble!" he exclaimed. "Sylvester would have loved it for his collection." He put the pebble on the rock. They sat down to eat. Sylvester was now as wide awake as a donkey that was a rock could possibly be. Mrs. Duncan felt some mysterious excitement. "You know, Father," she said, "I have the strangest feeling that our dear Sylvester is still alive and not far away." I am! Sylvester wanted to shout, but he couldn't. If only he had realized that the pebble resting on his back was the magic pebble. "Oh, how I wish he were here with us on this lovely May day," said Mrs. Duncan. Mr. Duncan looked sadly at the ground. "Don't you wish it too, Father?" she said. He looked at her as if to say, "How can you ask such a question?" Mr. and Mrs. Duncan looked at each other with great sorrow. "I wish I were myself again. I wish I were my real self again," thought Sylvester. And in less than an instant, he was. You can imagine the scene that followed. The embraces, the kisses, the questions, the answers, the loving looks, and the fond exclamations. When they had eventually calmed down a bit and had gotten home, Mr. Duncan put the magic pebble in an iron safe. Someday they might want to use it, but really for now, what more could they wish for? They all had all that they wanted. And there they are, the Duncan family. Good night, little girls. I love you, and I'll see you later.
Thank you, Mike. That was a beautiful story. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, this is one of our
That was
favorites.
Ocaria. That was me.
Yes.
Sorry.
You're right. Thank you, Ocaria. I appreciate it. It's one of our favorites, and I love reading it. And I thought for tonight's talk that it would be a reasonable way to get started. As I have read to my daughters every night for their entire lives, I have read some pretty thoughtful children's literature. And William Steig is certainly a thoughtful children's author. We have been talking about loss for our entire lives. We start talking about loss as little kids. But yet here we are, all grown. I'm in my 40s now, and it still perplexes me. And maybe the confusion of it comes from this child's storybook perspective. The idea that what we lose can be found. And that's not always the case. And as adults, we know that. And that is what I explored in my memoir, Where Are You? It's amazing now. It's almost a year ago that this book was published, and it is 2 years since I wrote it. And how much has changed in here since then. I think the issues are the same for me, but the way I deal with them has changed. And the issues, I mean the issues of isolation, abandonment, sadness, I think that they are all still there. The guilt that we invariably experience, whether or not we have anything to be guilty about, obviously, we still feel that. All of these feelings, the stages of grief, I think I'm experiencing differently now than I did before writing the book. So 5 or 7 or 15 years ago, I'd say I was struggling. and I still struggle at times. But having written the book and having gotten the guidance I needed to do so, has helped me to maybe feel about loss that way, if that makes sense. Maybe what I've lost, though not found, and not, or I should say, not returned to me, it's not so bad to cuddle up and hug what you've lost, even if it is just the memory of what you've lost, or the or a keepsake of what you've lost, or a book. I've done a few readings like this, although, Oparia, thank you, but I've never done a Zoom reading, so thank you. I've done a few readings, and possible that my wife, Tara, hasn't come to one of them. And that is through no fault of her own, nor is it any blameworthy reason. More or less, she's with the kids when I am out doing these readings, and she is with them right now. And she's such a critical part of my experience of loss that I find it necessary to read. The first chapter of the book is called Tara. It is about her. It appears that everyone here knows me, and maybe knows my story, but Tara and I lost a pregnancy in 2000. And so the greatest loss, of which my memoir is subtitled, is that we lost a baby at 28 weeks on December 5th of 2008. And the loss of a pregnancy, child at all, a loss of this nature is extremely complicated and makes you really wonder and doubt everything that you thought was certain, and everything. And our love for each other and our marriage is one of those things. And I don't mean to say that we doubted it in that way, but I can't explain it any other way than to say it makes you doubt. And even if it's not a conscious doubt, there's something in you that everything has been shaken. What's important to me, I think, is the way Tara and I have come back to each other. And so whenever I do a reading, I start a chapter called Tara. So I'm going to read this. Okay, my wife, Tara, and I met the week of July 4th, 1999, on the Jersey Shore's Long Beach Island. Some of the guys and I had been spending the week at my friend Jimmy's shore house. Above the garage was a deck that we entertained on each night. On the last evening, I was exhausted and decided to take a bit of a power nap before things really got rolling. At some point, my friend Mark shook me from bed and said to come on out. Sleepily, I said, I'll be out in a while. Mark said, no, come on out now. You got to see this girl. So I went out. And there was this stunningly gorgeous girl worth 1,000 chips girl. Her smile shook through the night. Her eyes and nose said, I am beautiful like time itself, and mountains crumble at my side, and so will you. Her beauty was born on the coast of the Mediterranean 3,000 years ago, and it made the world stop and look again. And I was defenseless, just as every smitten lover should be. Mike, this is Tara. I said hey and walked away with my beer and my diffidence, peeking over at her from time to time. As the crowd diminished over the next hour or so, I joined the conversation of which she was part. But when she talked, the group disappeared. And when I talked, I was talking only to her. I have a vivid recollection of being in my parents' Ford LTD station wagon when I was a child. I was in that in-between stage of sleep and alert in the back seat, leaning against my grandmother's shoulder. And I could smell my mother's coat, equal parts perfume and cigarette smoke. Smell I will never forget. And on the oldies radio station, I heard the flamingos, I only have eyes for you. When I met Tara in Long Beach Island, I knew that song again. Maybe millions of people go by, but they all disappear from view. And I only have eyes for you. Shabop, shabop. I was in love. Tara was a no-nonsense business school student at Seton Hall in New Jersey. I was loafing around literature and philosophy classes at Queens College, working at a book bindery and going out with the boys. She was Italian and I was Irish. She was 4 years my junior, and I knew immediately we were opposites, and I knew immediately that I was in love. As the night rounded to an end, as she and her friend departed, I said goodbye. And she said, "You're not going to ask me for my number?" Shy little boy. We exchanged numbers. For a while, I would tell friends that I was going to hang out with that girl from Jersey. Then, after a while longer, they all knew Tara. We were married on July 2nd, 2004. Of course, there is more to it all than that, but maybe some other time. And that, of course, is the happy couple. So that is the very happy beginning of our life together. And, you know, sometimes I think about these talks and reading from this book, and I wonder if I misrepresent things a little bit. Of course, it's not true. We suffered a terrible loss. I have suffered some substantial loss in my life, and it's affected the way I think and live. It's affected the way my wife and I have, you know, it's affected our marriage, you know. But the fact of the matter is, we're in love, and, you know, it's a great life. I'm just happy, you know. So I kind of feel bad sometimes when I talk about the book. It's a segment of the life, and sometimes that segment seems all-consuming. But we had a great day today, and I'm in a good mood. So it's better for me to do this in, you know, after a work day or something. I'm in a bad mood. You know, I'm obviously teasing, but the fact of the matter is, like I said, so much changes, and I think that I talk about this in the book. That those stages of grief are in flux always. That there are times that I've accepted, and there are times where I haven't. Had a really good session with my therapist today, so I'm feeling really good. So I got to get into the zone here. We lost our baby. We named her Sophia, December 5th, as I said, 2008. So this chapter is called Sophia. In the spring of 2008, Tara and I conceived our first child. We were living in Long Beach, a barrier island on the Atlantic shore of Long Island, New York. In Long Beach, you wear flip-flops in the frozen beach February. Sweatpants and Uggs are requisite wardrobe. In Long Beach, all things are cool. Living there in our 6th floor apartment with a Manhattan view balcony, as the realtor advertised, meant Tara and I, and all of the 20-something residents that called Long Beach home, were committing to a life of peace and chill times, laid-back dinners, carefree walks to the beach, and so on and so on. Life was good. Everything was going according to plan. Everything on schedule. Tara and I felt so in control. We did what we wanted. We were accomplishing what we hoped. What we planned for materialized. Tara's belly was growing. We were planning. Proud grandparents were glowing. Friends were high-fiving. We're keeping the gender secret. It's a girl, I'd hope. We will name her Sophia Michelle. We are buying you clothes now and books now, Sophia. We are calling you little birdie now. I am singing to mama's belly now. I am talking to mama's belly. I am singing to you, little baby. I'm talking to you, Sophia. I am your daddy, little girl. Autumn in Long Beach, Thanksgiving, Christmas is coming, and we're expecting our first child in the late winter. So that's 2008. I mean, that's already 12 years ago. And it's difficult sometimes to even remember those times. The confidence, almost it seemed like obliviousness, like life is so perfect and everything is going well. And we had zero thought that things could go other than how we planned. But there is always some hurt. Tara is a worrier. She's worried. Everything is going to be okay, I said. I don't feel the baby moving. It's okay. The baby's getting bigger now. There's not enough room for her to move around like that anymore. Something's wrong. Everything's okay. Don't worry. That was December 3rd, 2008 evening. We went to sleep. We went to work. My cell phone vibrates in my pocket regularly while I'm at work. Normally, I leave the vibrating nuisance in my pocket and check missed calls at some point later on. But that morning, for some reason, I pulled my cell from my pocket and saw that Tara was calling. This was very uncommon, so with a suspicion of dread, I answered in the middle of class. She said, "The baby's not moving. The doctor told me to go to the hospital." I left class immediately. I sped over to Tara's office. She got in. I held her hand. She was crying. "Everything's going to be okay," I said. Is it a lie when we speak with certainty about something we don't actually know with certainty? I know as we drove to the hospital, I believed it might be okay. It doesn't have to be the worst. We're so blessed. Everything is going according to plan. Why should it be the worst? There's no reason to believe that. I said some Hail Marys just in case. Everything's going to be okay, I said, as I drove to the hospital in my dark thoughts of the worst. At the hospital, a nurse told us, "I'm sorry, I don't hear a heartbeat. The baby's gone." Tara cried out. I've always thought of it as a howl. I've never heard that sound from her before or since. I can hear it still in my mind, the forever and repeating echo of death. Up there now, because that was a shock, a disorienting shock. You don't know what's up, what's down. And we felt that pain together. And in a strange way, even though you feel it together, you experience it alone. And that loneliness is a big reason for, one of the reasons maybe for what is called a complicated grief. Losing a pregnancy is one of many losses which are called disenfranchised. It's a disenfranchised grief. It's a strange thing, but simply put, disenfranchised means that culturally you are not entitled to feel bad for this loss. Now, when you confront people with the idea that there is such a thing as disenfranchised grief, there is such a thing that the world says, get over it. And so members of the world say that more frankly than others. But it's true. Disenfranchised grief is a real thing. People that suffer disenfranchised grief are frequently people who say a divorced spouse. You've been divorced and your spouse passes and you are grief-stricken, but the world says, well, you got a divorce. That means you don't care, so what do you care? Families of suicides also experience a disenfranchised grief because of the cultural aversion to suicide or distaste for it. Either we ask you not to feel bad, or we ask you not to talk about it. Because suicide is taboo and culturally not accepted, it's difficult for your grief process to be articulated. Families of capital punishment, what do you call, death penalty. Prisoner is executed, and the mother grieves just like any mother might. It's a disenfranchised grief because you feel you can't tell people, well, my son was a criminal who was killed, executed. So you're not able to talk about it. Disenfranchised means somehow that the world says, we don't really want to hear about this. And that might be actually exactly what it is. We don't want to hear about it. It's too much. It's easier for us to consider a murderer put to death in the electric chair or whatever. It's easier for us to consider that person as a non-person. It's easier for us to cope with that justice than it is for us to think, wow, that guy had a mother or a father who loved him, a family who mourns him. In our case, talking about losing a pregnancy is difficult because there's all kinds of questions of value. Out of sight, out of mind type of thing. The world hasn't seen the child yet, so the world doesn't understand its value. And also it's horrifying. It's also horrifying. And people don't want to hear about it. So disenfranchised grief is a complicated thing, and complicated grief. That's what's actually characterized. A grief that, because it can't be processed in the normal way, leads to complications. But when I was writing the book, I said, I think that my grief is more than just the loss of my baby. I lost my brother Brian to suicide when I was 17 years old. He was 24. It was 1993. And my grandmother, who lived a good, long life, 90-something years old, lots of children. And by lots, I mean like 9. Dozens of grandchildren, great-grandchildren, right? Full life, great life. And I write about her, and I write about my brother. I think that the original vision of the book was about stillbirth, but I realized that a loss is a loss is a loss, and that grief affects us all in many, many similar ways. I would like to share a chapter. The book is entitled "Where Are You?" But there is a chapter called "Where Are They?" And it's been a while since I read, so I want to make sure that I am reading the right one. Yeah. So this chapter to me is important because it's about multiple losses in my life. It's almost a lossography. It's like keeping track of what I have lost. And I'm going to read from it. Where are you, Sophia, my sweet little baby? Where are you, Brian, my poor lost brother? Where are you, Jean Marie? Where are you, Frank and Doug? Where are you, Tommy? Where are these people I know who died so suddenly, so young? Where do they go? Some of them I only knew for a short time, so why don't I forget them? Some of them I hardly knew. Would I forget them if I had the choice? If they didn't die, would I remember them? Would I be better off if I could erase this devastation? Why does losing them make me feel so lost? Frank was a boy in my homeroom. In 10th grade, he took his own life. I think that might have been the first person that I knew independently that died. and certainly the first person I knew who committed suicide. I don't remember, and it's not my story to tell, but I was at the funeral, and I remember his sister processing out of the church, and she was wearing his clothes. I think his jacket and tie and an overcoat of his, if I remember correctly. Little did I know how well I would come to know her pain one day, but at the time I only saw a little girl in her brother's clothes, and I thought that she must feel so sad. Doug died in a fight. He was struck with a bat or a club or a stick during an altercation. He apparently seemed well enough immediately afterwards, so his friends took him home. He died in his sleep. He was a good guy, funny as hell. I played lacrosse with him for a little while in high school. I think I must have been 19 or so when he died. So we had graduated high school already. A former classmate called me and asked if I'd heard about Doug. He told me what happened, and we went to the funeral together. I remember seeing some old high school friends at the funeral mass, and one of them saying, if it weren't for weddings and funerals, we were kids, for crying out loud, and already trading empty platitudes about death. We were kids at a kid's funeral. So who could blame us for not knowing any better than to repeat the emptiness we'd heard baffled adults utter to each other? But I guess that's death. We're all clueless. Tommy died. That one hurt. Of course, now I know they all hurt. But he was a good buddy. Again, these aren't my stories to tell, but I feel like I have to. Tommy was so good. Our friendship started out when we recognized we liked the same music. Then we hung out once or twice. He was smart and funny and generous. We were walking back to my house one night. We were seniors in high school. We were cutting through a schoolyard. My brother Brian had died some months before. Tommy asked, "Want to sit and talk for a while?" I said, "Sure." So we sat on a schoolyard bench. I figured we'd talk about nonsense, but he said, "Can you tell me about your brother?" What a brave kid. We talked about my brother Brian, his illness and death. I'll never forget that. Tommy died. By then, we drifted apart, but it was very, very sad. Again, just a kid. Just a kid. All kids. And I haven't ever really processed what it meant to me. And I haven't even begun to talk about Jean Marie. Jeannie died driving from Long Island to a friend's place in Pennsylvania to kick off the summer the morning after her senior prom. She was driving a small group of friends. She fell asleep at the wheel and was thrown from the car. We were all graduating. We were seniors and pumped for what we'd hoped might be a great summer. I'd known Jeannie since I was in second grade. Jeannie and the girls were like sisters. We'd all known each other since grade school. We were all crushed. She might have been the friendliest, happiest girl I knew. I came home from a show, Beastie Boys, I think. When I came home from the train, my mother and sisters were in the front room of my house. Of course, I knew, as one does in such scenarios, that something was wrong. My sister said, "Something bad happened." My mother, interjecting quickly, hoping to soften the blow, said, "Well, not that bad." My other sister, hastening my mother and crying, said, "Yes, it is, Mom." It's funny, but my mother and my chastening sister were both right in their separate ways. My sister, of course, meant Jeannie is his friend, our friend. Our families know each other. She died with calamitous suddenness. You can't say it's not that bad. My mother certainly didn't mean it's not that bad in an eye-rolling, toughen up, buttercup kind of a way. She certainly meant this was late May 1994. My brother Brian had died some half a year earlier. Everything was death. And every death seemed to shrink in terror of my brother's awful departure. She certainly meant, compared to losing your brother, to losing my son, compared to the devastation we endured just a walk around the block ago. She didn't mean it's not that bad. She meant it's not that. Meanwhile, I, stone-faced and prepared for the inevitability of death, stood at the entrance of my home with the door just closed a second ago behind me, and waited. In fact, I expected. As they fumbled with their telling of the terrible news, to learn that another brother of mine might have died, perhaps in a car wreck or some other fatal accident. Jeannie died, someone said. I can't remember who actually said it. Do you believe that? I can remember where everyone was sitting. I can remember everything up until the actual announcement. I was elsewhere. I don't know where. I was spinning somewhere. I was cradling my broken heart somewhere, lulling it to sleep with soothing lullabies, imploring myself from the deep nooks and crannies of hurt to breathe, just breathe, just breathe, move, just move, walk, don't talk, blink, don't cry, don't fall, don't fall, don't fall, don't fall. This is death. This is just death. This is life. This is just life. This is the way it happens. Breathe. Some months ago, when talking to my sister about that little touch of loss and its impact on my life and my need to write about all that's happened, I mentioned these deaths of friends and loved ones. In order of disappearance, Frank, a strange, sad ripple, a foreshock. Brian, the annihilation. Jean Marie, numbness. Doug, I was a confused wannabe adult. Tommy, again? Sophia, my baby, my heart, my aching heart. How much more must I endure? My sister said, that's a lot. And she repeated, after a second of consideration, that's a lot. And I agreed and said, it is. It is a lot. It was important to me to include that chapter because this is not a book about stillbirth. It's a book about loss. But it's a book about healing too. And if it's all right, Carrie, I know we're getting close. I'm going to read, can I read one more?
Absolutely. And we, don't worry, the time is not important.
Okay.
I'd rather it be a program that we all enjoy. Don't worry about the
Great.
time.
Okay.
Not at all.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, in that case, maybe I'll do two. Well, I'll tell you what. The funny thing is that this is clearly a book about death and healing. But as I started reading, in the beginning from Sylvester, children experience loss. Children experience death. We, from our earliest memories, experience loss. And there are 3 chapters consecutive, which are titled Losing Things 1, Losing Things 2, and Losing Things 3. So I'm going to read Losing Things 3, I think. Let me make sure that's right. Nope. Losing Things 2. I should know my own book better than I do. Losing Things 2. All right, so this is short. And I include this to sort of incorporate loss on so many levels and how it really does affect us, even as children. When I was a little kid, I had a purple Mako Shark Corvette Matchbox car. It was the envy of the boys on the block. It rolled better than any other Matchbox car, and it was rare. No one saw one like it. I loved that car. I used to have a Hot Wheels dragway racetrack. You'd place the car in one of two tracks and roll it back against the spring-loaded launch space. Another car could be placed beside it, and then a release button simultaneously sent the cars flying down a racetrack a few yards long. We'd race cars like that for hours. Sometimes we'd place bets on the races and wager our different cars. We all had favorites, and the Mako was mine. It never lost. My pals would only race me on condition that I not use the Mako. They all wanted it. I don't know how many baseball cards or comic books or G.I. Joes were offered for that car. I always said no. That car was awesome. But then it was gone. My parents had company, and it was gone. There were kids there, but I can't believe someone would have stolen it. I mean, the car was cool, but the kids that were at the party weren't the neighborhood boys that knew of the legend of the Mako shark. Did I boast the Mako to these kids? Did I simply fawn? Was the wonder of this little car innately alluring? I don't know, but it was gone. I looked everywhere. Trust me, I'm a good looker. When I lose something, I can really look for it. Obsessive. I cried and told my parents someone stole it. I accused their friends' kids. My parents are good people and wouldn't believe someone stole something. Or maybe they just didn't want to ask their friends to interrogate their kids. Or maybe they thought I lost it. Clearly, they didn't know how much I loved that car. Or maybe they didn't care that I lost a stupid car. But I looked in every corner of my house. It was gone. And I looked for a long time. The truth is, I still look. And I don't know how funny this is. I should really tell my therapist about it. But if I go to my folks to find a tool in my dad's cellar or to look for some old albums or photos, I'll move some random boxes around just to see if I can find them. I think about the feeling of finding that thing. I'd be overjoyed. I might cry. I think about the feeling of finding that thing. I'd be overjoyed. Might cry. People who suffer traumatic death they're almost like flashbacks, they're fantasies, where you envision seeing the person you've lost. I still imagine rolling up to a bus stop one day and seeing my brother there. He's always in these fantasies, these constructions. He's always homeless, mentally ill. He's ragged and disheveled, but I can see his eyes and I know it's him. And I get out of the car and I rejoice. Because I found him. I imagine a life where my daughter Sophia is born and I've got 3 daughters playing in the backyard. I wonder what it would be like to find that car. I would cry. To get back the things we lose is the great search of life. It is Gilgamesh's journey. He wants Enkidu back. He wants his friend back. That's what it all comes from, is loss. But as I said, this is a book about hope. It is a book about me being here today, reading to you of this awfulness and saying, my life is good. I frequently struggle, but I'm happy. I'm going to finish up tonight with, today is the best day of my life. I have learned, or I am learning, in these last couple of years, that my language can very much define my reality. This has been a struggle for me at times to accept, because I can say anything I want, but saying of the thing doesn't make it true. If it's pouring out and I say it's a sunny day, that's not defining my reality, that's lying to myself. However, if it's raining out and I say it's a beautiful day, that's a different story. That's subjective. Who's to say the rain isn't beautiful? What I've realized is that quite a bit of my feeling lost in my life, quite a bit of my sadness may have been a matter of perspective. I can't really say why I felt this way. maybe a childhood trauma, maybe some breach of trust, however minor, or maybe what has warped my ability to gauge the goodness of my own life. Maybe it was just me. But the fact is that I would say I didn't have a very happy childhood. Or maybe the fact is better stated, I don't remember seeing joy in my childhood. I had everything a child could want to be happy, but I was plagued for as long as I can remember with a sense of sadness. I'm certain this is a pretty clinical definition of depression, which absolutely runs in my family. When I was a boy, maybe 10 or 11, I was sulking around the house at some family party of one sort or another. My Uncle Daniel stopped me in the kitchen and asked me why I wasn't smiling. I don't remember what I said, but Uncle Daniel told me, walk around the house once and smile when you come back to the kitchen. So I walked a lap around the house, from the kitchen to the living room to the dining room and back to him in the kitchen. And he was standing there smiling, and I did everything I could to show him I wasn't having it. I grilled him hard. So Uncle Daniel shook his head and said, do it again. After 4 or 5 times, I couldn't help bursting out in laughter. He smiled as he held me by the arm and looked at me and said, that's the smile factory, Michael. You can walk through it anytime you want. Just remember that smiles are made, okay? I said okay as I tried unsuccessfully to shed the silly smile my uncle's loving tease produced. Then Uncle Daniel said, Michael, today is the best day of your life. Suddenly I grew serious again and responded emphatically that it wasn't. Yes, it is, he said to me simply. But I pointed out that today is miserable and yesterday was better. He said no, that yesterday is never better than today. So I pointed out that tomorrow might be better than today. He said no, that tomorrow is never better than today. I said, what if today is the worst day of my life? He said no, that today is always the best day of your life, that today is the best day because we have it. For as long as we have today, it is the best day of our life. I guess I understood what he meant at the time, but I have understood what he meant better as an adult, even though at times I have failed to understand, or I have simply rejected what he meant. And I am really realizing now, I think, what he really meant. And I'm wondering how far I can push his philosophy. The day my brother left and disappeared, that was the best day of my life. The day I married Tara, that was the best day of my life. The day Charlotte was born, that was the best day of my life. The day we took Judith home from the NICU, that was the best day of my life. The day we learned Sophia was conceived, that was the best day of my life. The day Sophia died, that was the best day of my life. Those each were the best days of my life because I had them. The day is the best day of my life because I have it. Thank you so much. Ocaria, thank you so much for having me tonight.
Oh, thank you so much, Mike. Let me just stop the recording so we can discuss. Hold on
Sure.
1 second.